everyone has trauma. Agree or disagree?
Bullshit. I call bullshit. Okay? Yeah, I call bullshit. Because if everything is trauma, then nothing is trauma, right? Like,
Myth number 18, your ex is definitely a narcissist.
yes, like, no. Yeah, in fact, you are probably the narcissist.
Welcome to the Psychobabble podcast. My name is Joe Nucci. I'm your host, and today I have the honor of sharing a conversation I had with RaQuel Hopkins. RaQuel is a capacity expert. She's a licensed psychotherapist just like me, and she has a rich background in coaching and HR. Today, we are actually going to be talking about a bunch of different mental health myths that are plaguing our culture. All of this psychobabble, all of this therapeutic jargon. Some of them are actually in my upcoming book. And for those of you who are not aware that I've written a book, it's coming out in September, and you get a preview you can only see here. I cannot wait to share this episode with you. Today, I am talking with the brilliant and charismatic and recent social media phenomenon. She's been going viral in case you haven't seen her, RaQuel Hopkins. Hey, RaQuel, how are you?
Hi, Joe. I am great. I can't wait to have this conversation.
Oh my, me too. So I first encountered you through a video where you were basically saying that a lot of this like pop psychology, a lot of this psychobabble, if you will, not all of it is good or even neutral. Some of it's actually like harming people. It's harming people on their journey, and it's something worth talking about. And I was super, super excited to talk with you about it because when I started posting on social media, this was something that I was saying in a very different way, from a very different perspective. And I just thought it was so cool that someone else was also seeing what I saw. And so I was super excited to dive in with you about all the things. I'm wondering though, before we get into it, I would love to just learn a little bit more about you. I know that you're a psychotherapist. I know that you are a capacity expert, and I want to hear more about your philosophy around that. And you're also an HR professional. And
Yeah.
so if you could, for those listening who aren't familiar with you, what's the journey been like? How did you get here?
So, I didn't go the traditional track into the mental health industry. I have a primarily an HR background, with like one of my highest roles being VP of HR. And in 2019, peak of my career, very successful on paper. I was like, there has to be more to life than this. So I decided to go to this coaching program called IPEC, and I went to that program, and I continue to say still probably one of the best investments that I've made in myself. And I go to that program and I was like, there's no way that I'm going back into HR. That was a lie. But at the time, that's what I had decided on. And I always tell people that when I can't figure out my life, Joe, I have educrastination. So I had already had an MBA. I was like, you know what? Coaching wasn't as popular back then as it is now. And I wanted like a plan B just in case I decided not to go into HR. So that's what made me go back and get the second master's in clinical and mental health counseling. I did not know how it would take off, how I would actually use it. I didn't ever plan on being a therapist per se. I had went back to get the degree because I felt like it could support my coaching background. When I got into the industry, and I started just kind of diving into like the information coupled with how we were being taught, and then paying attention to like mainstream media. I was like, this is just not it. And as someone that was navigating a lot of life transitions at the time, I came into the program as working at the executive level, already a mom of one at the time, and also married. And I was like, I'm already good at coping. Like, where are some other modalities or tricks to support me from transitioning out of survival mode? And when I say out of survival mode, I was like, I know how to manage life. I know how to cope. Like, what does it really look like to thrive? Because I was the queen of no new friends, protect your peace, protect your boundaries, and I still felt exhausted. So I was looking for something else. And because I was looking for something else, I found something else. They say if you go looking for something, you'll probably find it, right? So I was at the
Totally.
doctor's office with one of my kids, because I have two now. And I remember looking at the developmental chart, and I was like, why don't we have this? We talk a lot about childhood, like kids have it all. And then I just went back and I Googled adult development, and this guy named Robert Keegan popped up.
I
You
love
know,
him.
I love Robert Keegan. You have his
He's literally right here on my
is he?
shelf within arm's reach. Look.
Oh, you have the evolving self. So I
Yeah.
have in over our heads.
Oh, I don't know that one.
So it's the modern demands of modern life. And this is where the concept of capacity comes from because he talks about how we develop cognitively or not over time. And my mind started processing it not from a linear standpoint, but more like life is like a cycle to me. So I was like,
Hmm.
we still have these forms of mind in adulthood that he's saying that only show up in childhood. And the concept of capacity came from that because it's like not so much about how much you hold or you carry, but who do you have to become in order to carry what you have and to carry more. So
Mm.
that's where the concept of capacity. You just made my day that you know who Robert
Oh my
Keegan
god,
is.
you too. I feel like a lot of
Yes.
people on our field don't for some reason, and he's like the
He
best.
is the best. And there's another, I don't think I have her book here, but she has started doing her, I can't think of her name right now, Jennifer Garvey, I believe. She's
Hmm.
created some additional books that expands upon Robert Keegan's work.
Oh, fascinating.
Jennifer Garvey Berger or something. And I connected with her on LinkedIn and she talked to you and everything. Like, it's just
Oh,
awesome.
awesome. Well, so bringing it back, so you discover Robert Keegan, and then what happens?
So I actually was quiet. So I discovered Keegan in 2021 or 2020, and this was around COVID time. This is around the time where I really felt like mental health awareness was at an all-time high, and I was like, I'm definitely not gonna say what I'm thinking, right? Because people are going to therapy, people are becoming more open minded about getting support. And then I was like, I'm new to the industry. Like, who the heck are you to come into this new industry and think that you know what you're
Right.
talking about? You're an HR professional, you're no mental health professional. And at the time, I was working as a mentor coach with the coaching program that I went to. So you always had to bring in a topic, and every time someone would coach me, I would be like, I'm just not feeling what they're teaching. Like something is off. And then every day I would see like something that you get like this nagging feeling that you can't just let it go no matter what. But because I was in this phase of transition, I like imposter syndrome, right? Like you can't speak about this stuff. You haven't been in the industry long enough. So I remember reading there was a definition about mental health or something, and it said the I saw the word optimization in there, and I was like, optimization? Well, that's not how we talk about mental health today. Like, and it's not about optimizing; it's about self protection and protect your peace and then I
Hmm.
saw something else that said that, mental health experts are not experts in mental health. We support people in navigating transitory issues that have the ability to plague their mental health. And I was like, well, what's the difference between mental health versus mental illness? Because they're used interchangeably.
Mm.
So I always tell people that I don't know if yeah, I remember like in undergrad when you would have the older people that would come to school like late after
Hmm.
they had their kids, and I'm like, why do they take life so seriously? Like, do you read the textbooks? And when I'm just skimming them and trying to like get by, I became that person in the mental health program. Like I was reading
Mm.
every textbook, digesting all of the information, and I just fell in love with it. And for the last year, I started creating content back in 2019 as like a life coach, as a coach. And over time, it has progressed. I've quit. I've started over. And this last year, I was actually in an HR. I was working for this company called VMware, a software development company, and my primary role there was I had a portfolio of about 270 leaders, and my role was to support them in developing their capabilities. And I got laid off, and I was like, you know what, this is a year that I'm just going to dive into my content and really put my thinking out there as it relates to mental health. And I was like, I'm just going to be consistent. And for about a year straight, the only people that liked my stuff, my husband, my two friends, and every now and then like a random person. And then January of 2025, I was like, that's it. I'm not going to be passive or make my messaging digestible because I'm walking around with this fear that people can't tolerate what I'm going to say. I'm just going to say it. Because I was having a lot of clients was like, oh, I've been in therapy for X amount of years, but something is still missing. And the more and more, it's like that nagging feeling kept coming back. Like I couldn't run from it. So in January of
Yeah.
2025, I said, that's it. I'm going to be aggressive with my messaging. I'm going to put the hooks there to catch people's attention. And what, February 16th, I had about 3,000 followers, and today I have 212,000 followers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I caught one of your early videos, and when I went to go and check your page about the time we got connected, I was like, "Whoa!" I was like, "She's growing." It's amazing, and well, I want to acknowledge a few different things. I think the first thing is that it's you're a very unusual person in the sense that you have the business training, right? The coaching training and the clinical training. And I'm wondering if you agree that those come together in a way that maybe makes you stand out amongst all the other noise that people have to navigate through in terms of your philosophy, your approach, and your opinions about everything that's happening in mental health culture.
I do, and that's why I struggled in the mental health program because it's science. Science tries to prove a point, and then you come from a business world, it's like black and white. But it's also critical thinking. It's being able to live in the gray. It's just because it looks this way doesn't mean it's that way. So my mind, I did struggle. That was a transition for me going from business into the mental health space, and the coaching was just, I think the coaching took me to another level as an HR professional. And then I started to see how it was coming together based off of the clients that I was working with, right? And people started saying, like, she's my therapist. And I wasn't even a therapist yet. I'm like, I'm not a therapist. Like, don't say that. I'm losing my license before I get up. And people, I just started listening to what people were telling me. And based off of what people were telling me, I was like, all right, you have something here.
Yeah. I mean, I think you absolutely do. So you've alluded to it a couple of times where like you didn't want to say it or you were afraid of being blunt and straightforward about your views. How would you like what is like the meta of like what your views are? Like what were you so hesitant to say, and then what are some of the things did you actually say that then obviously resonated with so many people?
I think that the industry or how we have positioned it is making a lot of people weaker, emotionally fragile. People are starting to depend on therapy from a long-term perspective, and that never was the goal or the intent. I think that as much awareness as we have within this space, I don't think it has created healing and growth per se. I think that we've created a lot of codependency. I think that
Mm,
we have created emotionally fragile people, people that are not comfortable with discomfort and uncertainty, and really have a hard time navigating relationships, navigating life in general as a whole. And I didn't want to say that, right? Because even as an HR professional, you you see people struggling like mental it got to a point to even where you were hear leaders saying, one, I don't want to be responsible for people's mental health. Or I always use this joke. I always tell people this, like when I got into the mental health program, just based off of how the program is ran. I've used my mental health as an excuse to get out of like assignments before. Like in my MBA program, that would have been like a hard no. Now, maybe there was some grace that was needed on the MBA side because, life is hard. Life can be challenging. But in the mental health program, it was much easier to use mental health as an escape from life and discomfort and doing hard things. And
right.
I know that none of us, we don't grow without hard things. And the challenge that I had was I didn't want people to think that I was saying like, we just want you to bootstrap because no, I understand that life is hard. So I had to really pull away from RaQuel. When you're on social media, you're not serving clients. You have a message and you have a goal, you have a vision in
Right.
terms of what you're wanting to put out. Like your clients know you, you have to trust who you are as a person. And if people don't receive your intent, that's not your issue. So
Right. I mean, it all makes sense to me, and you're preaching to the choir on some of the problems that plague our field. And I think that one of the ways I've gone about articulating the problem, and it sounds like you agree, is that it's good that there's less stigma. Like, it's good that there's more awareness. I'm not against any of that. The misinformation, not so good. But it also seems like some of the problems that have plagued the field that maybe were kind of out of sight, out of mind, like, some therapist, practicing who knows where is cultivating a codependent relationship with their client or patient. And it's just not in your face. And so even though it's in some ways a dirty little secret of the field, I actually believe that most practitioners are fairly competent. I feel like most of them are just kind of keeping their heads down and doing what they got to do and doing what works. But I have found that through the popularization of mental health and related topics, it seems like a lot of those more pitfalls and those trouble areas are in your face, just whether it's online or in how people then kind of take psychological jargon or concepts and then misapply them in their life.
Yep.
And, whether it's on the messenger or the person that misinterpreted the message or is twisting it for their own, I don't know if quite agenda, but for their own needs, wants, desires, boundaries, preferences, etc., it's still a problem.
Yep. Yeah, no, I would agree. And you can't be in business unless you have a problem to solve. So that was the other thing. I was like, I don't want to attack therapists per se. So I'll just say the mental health industry as a whole, because I do know great therapists, right? I do know people that have benefited from therapy. So it was like, how do you put this message out there without discrediting the professionals, but also bringing awareness to, that's my other thing too, like, I don't think that we needed to destigmatize mental health. I think we needed to destigmatize struggle and seeking support and destigmatize
Mm.
mental illness, because mental health is something that we all have. Like, to me, it would be like destigmatizing your heartbeat or destigmatizing something that you live with daily. We destigmatize things that create shame, and I don't know why we would have shame around mental health. Like, we all have it. It's what you use to
Hmm.
engage with life every day. So
Yeah.
that made no sense to me.
Uh, totally. Tell me a little bit about how you view mental health versus illness versus capacity. And it sounds like we're kind of circling this topic, something that I speak a lot about and write a lot about, which is, let's not medicalize everyday life or what we would consider like normative experience. How do you understand all those pieces fitting together?
So first, when I say mental health versus mental illness, mental health is something that we all have, right? It's how you think, feel, and function every day. And life is going to challenge how you think, feel, and function. And that's where we come in as therapists, right? Now, based off of whatever those challenges are, or whatever your basic functioning skills or coping skills are, we all have the ability to be impacted by a mental illness, whether it becomes anxiety, depression, and then you have the more severe, whether we're talking about schizophrenia, bipolar, and those things. So I separate it from that standpoint. We all have mental health. Not everyone will experience a mental illness per se. And then the trauma aspect of it, because you just mentioned, every challenge is not traumatic or is trauma. And I always start with, trauma is subjective. Trauma is based off of your perception of something that happened. So I like to separate it from objective trauma versus subjective trauma, because there is a
Mm.
such thing as post-traumatic growth disorder, right? So when I say objective trauma, it's like if you were to pull anyone off of the street and they say, what do you think about this? For example, the most recent LA fires, right? No one could have prepared for it. No one saw it coming. And then you wake up and now you've lost your home and you don't get a chance to really process that. Like, it is the idea of your back is literally against the wall. You feel helpless. You feel hopeless. That to me is like objective trauma. That's like, it's it's a life challenge. However, you could not have predicted it. Now, the things that are more subjective to me would be loss of a job. Like, especially in the world that we live in today, as technology takes over, like the likelihood of you not knowing someone that's lost a job, or having been the person that has lost a job, or even having to lay people off, I don't think that that's abnormal.
Right.
However, I still think that it could be a traumatic experience, but it's more subjective because it's not abnormal. Having divorce, death, I think that those things are all a part of life. It hurts. Like you don't anticipate those things, but it's things that we know on a very basic or common level, that these things are bound to happen. These are the things that we don't necessarily have control over, but we know that they are also not abnormal.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, it's a perfect segue into something that I wanted to do with you during this episode. I have a book that is covering a lot of these topics in similar ways and some different ways. It's coming out in the fall. It's called Psychobabble: Viral Mental Health Myths and the Truths to Set You Free. And what I would love to do for you and for everyone listening is I would actually like to read out some of the chapter titles, because each chapter is what I think is a myth. So the title of what I articulate, the line, the aphorism, I don't agree with. And I would love to know, I would love to do two things with you. I'd love to get like your gut reaction, where you're like, yes, Joe, like
Can I
I also
curse?
agree. You can absolutely curse. and, or you can also curse and say like, wait a minute, no, like I don't agree with that. And then I'll give you a little more insight into what I talk about in the chapter, and we
Okay.
can riff about it. So myth number,
Congratulations, by the way.
oh,
That's exciting. Congratulations to you.
thank you so much. So there's about 40 myths in the book. Part four I call trauma drama, common myths about trauma, and so it's myth number 20. Everyone has trauma. Agree or disagree?
Bullshit. I call bullshit. Okay?
All right.
I call bullshit.
Yeah. Why? I'll tell you why I agree that I don't think it holds up to scrutiny. But
I
what are you
just
thinking?
think that we have to make the distinction between what is life, because if everything is trauma, then nothing is trauma, right? Like, you have to make the distinction, because if not, like, you start to adopt the identity of struggle. And I don't think that struggle is a badge of honor, especially when you start to talk about like transforming and growing and evolving into whatever your highest self looks like. I think that if you can't move away from trauma, and if everything is trauma, I think that your worldviews, they become very clouded.
Absolutely. The way I articulate it in the chapter is I say we have to distinguish between trauma and tragedy. We're all going to have tragedy occur to us, and life is hard. Like, some people would say life is suffering, and everybody has that. But one of the things that I've talked about with some other professionals in the field who align with us on this issue is, or it's Neha is at Indian sex therapist, and then my buddy Austin, who's more in the psychedelic space. In my conversations with them, they both said the same thing, which I think is very interesting because I don't think they overlapped in terms of listening to each other's episodes. They were like, but it is less important what happened to you then versus your relationship to it now. And as you know, a PTSD diagnosis, or even a less formal, just kind of like trauma label, applies to the reaction to the past in the present moment, in your present relationship or present circumstance. And so for me, that just kind of proves our point. And it's interesting that so many other professionals seem to resist that. I mean, I don't know about you, I've gotten a lot of resistance about this.
That's why I like to break trauma down from the objective standpoint and subjective, because the piece that we miss is a lot of the things that we talk about is subjective. We don't realize that trauma is based off of your perception. Even when you talk about like the LA fires, at some point people may transition over to like, while this happened, we were able to rebuild a new home. My family came closer. Like different stories come out of that. So no, I love what you're saying, and I love that you educate from the standpoint of holding people accountable. Like, you are responding or reacting to something in the past, and I think that it challenges victimhood, which I talk about often. Everybody wants to be
Mm,
a victim today. Like, it's like these victim terms or having trauma has become a way to create community today. And
Yeah.
community is important, but gosh, I don't want to be a part of a victim.
Right.
We've all been victimized, we'll be victimized, but we don't have to stay forever victims.
Totally. Yeah, well there are of course like real victims to like real like oppression or tragedy or
Hmm.
trauma in the world, but then there's like the narrative of victimhood, And when it comes to the latter, I mean it is just not helpful. And you know who it's the least helpful for is actual victims
It
in
is.
different circumstances,
No, it really is. It really is. And that was another reason I started creating my content because, like, the language triggered versus
Mm,
bothered. There are people that are actually triggered where they feel like they have no control over their reactions. If we go back to LA fires, if you smell smoke, like, there's a visceral reaction when a person is like triggered. And when we're talking about PTSD or traumatic experiences, like, no, most people are walking around bothered by everyday life. You're bothered by everyday
totally.
life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I don't have a chapter dedicated to like trigger or trigger warnings in the book. I talk about it in one of the chapters. Let's see here. It's Myth 27, mental health education is always beneficial. I'm just kind of highlighting that, you can learn a lot about these things or try to do these higher touch interventions like trigger warnings or like, feeling and emotionally kind of focused, like learning or whatever it might be. But as you may be aware, some of the studies that have come out have shown these things either don't help or they can make stuff worse. And people will get defensive, and I understand because they didn't go into it with that intention. But it's like, but you also have to take responsibility that we thought this was a good idea. It wasn't. One of the things that I explore, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is that it seems like because the term trigger kind of crept out as the definition of trauma expanded, it seemed to me that it started to then mean, well, I feel emotionally activated or I feel
Mm.
bothered, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, I actually am kind of curious about this area of the literature because I think that if we had kept trauma more delineated, more kind of objectively defined, and we studied proper trauma triggers or PTSD triggers, I think that maybe trigger warnings would be getting measured to be effective. Because if you, like, if you're, let's say, a survivor of sexual assault, just as an example,
Hmm.
and you're currently in therapy or not, it recently happened to you, and you sit down in class, and then there's discussion of rape, let's
Hmm.
say. Some of my patients with PTSD, when they dissociate, it's like for the rest of the day. You know what I mean? It's like I feel like that individual could have benefited from a trigger warning, but unfortunately, we've watered down all the terms that we've discussed so much where it's kind of like, no, these don't help people feel unbothered by it. It probably increases anxiety. But B, because now we've decided that these things don't work, at least as per the literature, I feel like the shot we had to help the person that was currently in treatment, it's just gone. And I think that's too bad as a mental health industry, as a mental health culture.
Yeah, I agree. I almost feel like they should, like, the language should only be available to us, and we have to figure out how to provide psychoeducation without using these terms that people can exploit and misuse.
So you're pro gatekeeping the terms.
To some degree, I think you should educate
Yeah.
people. Well, it's easier to say that today with seeing how things have transpired because
Right.
I'm a big component of just education in general, but I think it's how you educate, and with it being such a big field, it would be hard to gatekeep in that sense because we don't all provide psychoeducation in the same manner. It could be just like,
Right.
you know what I mean? So it would be hard, but it's unfortunate that the language has taken the turn that it has taken.
Yeah. Absolutely. When people have pushed back on you, let's say in terms of pushing back on trauma discourse, for example, one of the things that's happened to me that I thought was very interesting was that people brought identity politics into it. And it was kind of like, you're a harmful therapist or you're an incompetent therapist, like because of my skin color or because of my gender. And I'm just wondering, since we are different in those identity aspects, have you also received that? Or how have people come at you? Has it been more from a philosophical place? Like, did it ever get personal?
So people don't see me as having privilege. per se, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because woman and I'm black, right? So I think that people have received my messaging well,
Right.
despite race, religion, sex, or any of those things, or gender. So I think that people have received my messaging well. So a couple days ago, I did a post about narcissistic personality disorder because I'm like tired of hearing that too. Because if I feel like
Me too.
everybody's in a has been in a relationship with a.
Totally. So myth number, what is it
That
here?
is
Myth
just your
number
myth.
18,
Okay,
your ex
okay.
is definitely a narcissist.
Yes, like no. Yeah, in fact, you are probably the narcissist. And what happened was all of the people that loved me, which I'm learning because I'm new to this whole viral and having this large community. It was like you are absolutely wrong on this one, but what I was conveying is going back to this whole concept of victimhood is how have we because if we're talking about NPD, a clinical diagnosis, how have we turned someone else's mental illness into a story about our own suffering? Like to me that is very narcissistic
Totally.
within itself because and I don't know if it's because it's a personality thing, so it's easier to make judgments, and we get into whether you're a chemical imbalance and all those things, but it still doesn't change that this person does not have the ability to change in the manner that you want.
Right.
And so on one hand, I'm like, where's the grace and compassion? Doesn't mean that I'm saying that it's not right that it's fair that you felt abused and manipulated or gaslit or whatever it may be. But it's like, who's really the narcissist here? Because if you were to ask me, I've dealt with people who have been in relationships with people that struggle with depression, bipolar, and they feel the same way. So
Mm,
why is NPD here? But we don't. You don't hear other people's like, "Oh, I survived being with a depressed person.
mm.
I survived being with someone that lives with bipolar. What's the difference?
Yeah, that is so, so deeply insightful. I want you to repeat it and expand on it. The symptoms, quote unquote, or the consequences of having a narcissistic partner, whether it's NPD or just, a really kind of rigid personality, are the same as if your partner has major depression or bipolar or other mental illnesses outside of the personality domain. I think
Absolutely.
that's
Even
brilliant. Yeah,
alcoholism, like there's
yeah.
a level of abuse that comes with it, sometimes even physical. So to dismiss those things, it goes back to how I believe we have become very self-centered in the name of mental health and wanting our stories to matter, or this whole concept of wanting to feel felt, seen, and heard and understood.
Mm,
And again, other people voices go unheard. Like there
yeah,
are really people that are like married to people that live with mental illnesses, and it's not easy.
right. Yeah, absolutely. The comparison to the alcoholism is, I think, such a wonderful example that I think could really cut through the noise and help people understand what you're talking about. Because when people think someone with a substance use disorder or an addict or an alcoholic, they don't immediately think like, oh, that person has a narcissistic personality. They can see how they behave in a way that's narcissistic, how it's lacking in empathy towards others. And, I mean,
Mhm.
as you know, addiction is one hell of a mental illness, but
Mhm.
there's more, I think there's less stigma and more allowance for that kind of a quote unquote like mental health issue. And I had what was her name? It was such a good conversation. I had a psychiatrist on the show last season, and she was saying that they're finding that they're still a long way off, but they're figuring out actually how to generate insight into people with NPD. I don't know if you've heard
Mm.
this. I think it's fascinating, but the way they're doing it, I think is hysterical. They're doing it in group therapy. They bring a
Really?
bunch of people with NPD in a room together and because the patterns are so obvious when it's not you, right? So if you're a very grandiose narcissist, it's like I'm
Yeah.
special and blah blah blah. But when they see it in that person and that person, that person, that person, I guess it triggers some insight. And so I hope that they continue to research it and figure it out. It was Dr. Carlene McMillan. I had her on the show and we talked about this in that episode. And I just think it's so funny, man. Like, it's like, oh, it's when you're a narcissist, you think you're so special. And the cure may lie into putting you in a room with
With
other
other people.
people and being like, oh, my maladaptive coping strategies are the exact same as you and you and you, regardless of your identity and how much money you have and like whatever. And so I think it's funny,
That is
but
funny.
compassionately.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
That is
yeah.
funny. That is funny.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh man. Well, let me throw another myth at you.
Okay.
So this
These
is
are great,
actually
by
the,
the way.
oh, thank you. So this is the first myth of the book. This is how I open part one, Freudian fantasies. These are just common general myths. And myth number one is everybody should go to therapy. What do you think about that one?
I disagree. In
Yeah.
fact, I think that is toxic to think that everybody should go to therapy
Why?
because growth is not one size fits all. The thing about therapy is like we have the ability to help people unpack things, gain a deeper sense of awareness, but I think that those things can also happen through living. Like I always say, like in the streets, like outside, because the same thing in therapy, whatever you're unpacking, you have to go outside and actually apply it. You actually have to integrate
Right.
it. So I would say no. And I use my own personal experience. I didn't really want to shop around for a therapist, and I had one. And when I went in, she was great, but the typical, you start off with like your tell me about you, and because you don't really know what to talk about at that time, because I was new to the field too. And I was like, well, I lost my mom to an overdose, and she was, oh, that must have been hard for you. I was like, well, not today. I mean, I don't like that wasn't my truth anymore. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, but I had done that healing through my own work. Like when I became an adult, because there was a lot of judgment about losing my mom to an overdose. And as I became an adult, I started to understand like socioeconomic status and how
Right.
difficult it is for people that may not have resources. I knew that I didn't have a lot, but I didn't know what that translated to. And then when I became an adult, I was like, well, I'm a mom too, and if my kid knew some of the choices that I had made that could, potentially impact his lifestyle or those things, like he would feel the same. So I started to see myself in my mom. So I didn't need therapy for that, honestly. So I don't think that everybody needs it. Do I think that everybody could benefit from it? Yes,
Yeah.
if you get a good one, right? But not
Right.
everybody needs therapy. Could you benefit? Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the exact line I have in the chapter. It's like everyone can hope to benefit from it. I don't think everyone needs it. And I really learned this in my practicum in grad school because I remember, I don't know about you, but I went into grad school and I kind of had a sense of humor about it. I was kind of like, there's the stereotype, like this is one of the other myths, shrinks are crazier than their patients, right? But I was kind of prepared. I was kind of like, okay, like I'm going to learn some stuff about myself, and I was having a sense of humor about it. But then I started to treat some patients, and I mean this for those listening, like as compassionately, non-judgmentally as possible. But I just didn't know how badly some people were struggling with whatever it is. Like the OCD I knew was my friend who is a little bit of a perfectionist. I had never seen someone washing their hands
Oh
until they were like
gosh.
raw, and
Yes.
so people, so if you're a bit of a perfectionist and you never self-actualize and it causes some drama in your relationships, like maybe this is a hot take, but it's like I think you're going to be fine without therapy. Like I think you're still going to find a partner. I think you're going to do well at work. Like I think it's going to be okay. Your kids might bitch about you in therapy in the future, but like whatever. You know what I mean? They're going to talk about you no matter what, right? But I think that for someone in that other category, like someone who is, truly experiencing like dysfunctional behavior or coping, it's like that person needs some help. And for me, there's also a social justice issue, right? Because we have limited practitioners, limited competent
Hmm.
ones anyways.
Limited
And I think
competent ones. I would agree with that.
yeah, and it's something I think about because I live in Manhattan, like I don't take insurance, like some people I see absolutely need to be in therapy, but then there's some people they're more kind of about self-actualizing and I really
Mm.
enjoy that work, but sometimes I wonder just like for myself and someone who like cares about society, I'm kind of like, "Oh, well like, is this taking a spot away from someone that is really really going through it, you know?"
It is. I guess what comes to my mind is I think that that's where the privilege comes for the both of us in that sense, right?
Hmm.
Because you have the ability to start a private pay don't have to deal with insurance and all those things, so you really can focus on people. And then when you talk about like who are the therapists that are giving back, and I'm not saying that these are the incompetent ones either, it
Right, I
creates
agree.
this huge gap in terms of like people having decent mental health or overall well-being, because there are some people that can afford to pay for private pay, and maybe you get a better therapist, and you have the people that are taking insurance and it's more so about how many people you can see. Or so that's the part where it gets a little tricky in our industry,
Yeah.
because that's not my population per se, but I would say for people that wants to grow, because I've worked with the bipolar, but I saw something different. I saw like a top graduate from top university,
Mm,
and I was like, wow, this is what bipolar looks like. But I know that it's not, because I have family members that struggle and it doesn't look the same. But
yeah.
you start to see people with education and just their resources are different, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow, so you can live with this and you can self actualize based off of
Right.
whatever your limitations are. So it's just so complicated. That's why I say humans are so
Yeah.
complex. Like, you have to be able to
Yeah.
hold multiple perspectives. Actually, the video that I'm going to release tomorrow, because I was just looking at some of the comments today, is I think my title is going to be like, the mental health conversations are so underwhelming, and I use the example of like two things can be true. And I say, like, my 2-year-old knows that two things can be true. Like, mommy, I hate you, and then mommy, I want to hug. Like, I don't even know what
Right.
that means. I
Yeah.
think that when you can hold, like, the conversation that you and I was just having
Yeah.
about, there are some people that are waiting to get on your list. There are some people that can never see you, yet you know what you enjoy. Does that make you a bad person because you know that you're not a right fit for
Right.
that population? Can you hold your truth? Like, that goes beyond two things can be true. That's like your ability to hold
Right.
multiple perspectives in a very complex society,
Yeah.
because you do have like the almost like the have and have nots to some degree. And that takes a lot of cognitive flexibility, which I feel like, or as Keegan might say this, a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a really excellent segue to the next myth I want to give you a preview for.
I just
So
love your myths. They're
in
all like I feel like you've hit everything in this book. Like, it's going to be a good one.
oh no, I'm excited. I'll definitely I'll send you a copy, and we'll have to have you
Okay.
back on so we can dive in. In part five, social schisms, common myths about mental health and society. Myth number 25: your mental illness is a systemic problem. What's your take on this one?
Oh God, that's a tough one. So I'll tell you what comes to my mind. I go back and I think about textbook wise, right? It says the five privileges are, it's white, it's male, socioeconomic status, no disability, and heterosexual, right? And I
Right.
remember going through it and I was like, all right, which ones do I check? And I was like, okay, my mind goes to, well, I think that adversity is a privilege. Like,
Hmm.
I do. So I was like, well, I'm going to add a sixth one. And I added a sixth one. I was like, well, okay, I have this many privileges now per textbook. So
What do you
I,
mean by that? Just for people who may not understand,
uh,
diversity is also a
oh,
privilege.
adversity?
Oh, adversity.
Adversity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
adversity.
yeah. Well, yeah. Definitely explain that.
I think that not that you want to struggle, but this idea of like struggle helps you like find a way when there's no way. Struggle
Mm,
grounds you in something that from a spiritual standpoint, like faith, like you have to believe in like things that you cannot see. Like, that's what I think about when I think about adversity. Like, those are the things that, like, I am who I am today not because of the education that I have per se. And I always tell people this personal. So I always tell people that I went from shit to sugar, like the typical black
mm,
girl growing up in the projects, lose your mom to an overdose, then you move with your dad, and all of those things, right? And then when I graduated from, and well, let me go back. I had decided that I was going to go in the military. That was the way out, right? You go into the military. My dad's like, I ain't got no money. You need to go in the military. If you want to go to college, that's how you figure it out. Well, I had an uncle that made it. He had done very well for himself. So he was like, we're changing things. You're going to college, and I didn't know what made it had meant because I hadn't seen anybody make it. But I always knew that I mean, I saw my dad work hard. I saw those things. I wanted something just based off of seeing my mom, like her struggles, right? High school dropout, having me at 17, and then I graduated from college and I realized like my uncle really made it. He's built this multi-million dollar organization, and you graduate from college and I don't have to fight with society to figure out a job. And so I go into his organization. I eventually become his VP of HR, and it was so freaking hard. Like I thought that privilege meant like ease, and I did because I didn't know, right?
Right.
I thought that privilege meant ease, and I was ashamed to talk about what I was struggling with. And back then, I didn't know what depression was. I didn't know any of that stuff. I didn't have language. I can almost tell you today, based on what they said, I'm victimizing myself right now. I was probably depressed because we're not just talking about nepotism, right? Like I think that that's typical. People say, you take LeBron James, for example, his son, that's nepotism. I experienced microaggressions, which I didn't really know was a thing because I wouldn't talk to other friends because it's like everybody would say, shut up. Like at this point, you're privileged, right?
Mm,
And I didn't feel like I earned my spot, so I struggled with my self-esteem, my confidence. I felt like I had to work 10 times harder. I mean, most of the time you hear black women say they feel that way in corporate. I felt that way because I felt like something was given to me. But most people will tell
mm,
you that that was trauma. I don't think it was trauma when I reflect, but it was new. It was a transition. It was a change. It was something that I had never been exposed to. So I felt like I had to work 10 times harder because it's like, okay, I need to prove to my uncle that I'm deserving of this. He gave me an opportunity. And on top of that,
mm,
I don't want to let him down. Like I'm living in within
right.
his image. This is his company. Like, you know, set the bar high. So I struggled with that tremendously. I mean, I had people calling me incompetent. She doesn't know what she's doing, which is part of the reason why I would continue to go back to school because it was like this constant fight. And it seemed like no matter what you did, you could never win. And I think that that was my introduction into power. I had it. I could
Mm,
fire anybody. It made you think about diversity differently because it's not like we were looking for the white guy to go just hire off the street. I mean, just being honest, right? You hired people that looked like you until you decided to grow, and you're like, okay, it's not about those things. I got a chance to see what power is like, right? When I don't think most people get to experience power, right? And when you experience power, you don't know who you will become. Because if you've
right.
never had it, you don't you could be awful, and it's not about race anymore. So my
Mm,
mind, like that experience within itself, I challenged my victimhood, right? Because here I was in this place where I thought would offer me privilege and ease, and I felt like I would have did better out in corporate because you expect certain things, and I still
right.
got all of that and more. And on top of that, you had families saying, we don't want to hear you complaining. Like, what are you complaining about? You got it made. But I never felt that way.
Mm,
So, systemic, I mean, I felt like I was living with depression at that time. So it's like a yes
yeah.
and a no.
Right.
It's complex. Like you
Yeah.
have to learn to deal with the hand that you are dealt. You learn to deal with the hand that you're dealt.
Right. I can't remember the exact articulation in the chapter, but I think I say something like the systemic analysis needs to be part of the greater equation when you're helping someone or when you're thinking about what you're going through. It's weird. Sometimes I think I say that like, this is not the primary, mental health concern or whatever. And people will hear, well, the system doesn't matter. And then they bring it to a conversation about like privilege or identity or whatever it might be. But I'm saying, no, 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 I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm just saying it's one of many. Like this needs to be like a multivariate analysis.
Because it never takes away from you're responsible for your life. Like we can sit here and talk
Right.
about all those things all you want. You are responsible for your life. And I think that there are universal truths in life, and that
Yeah.
is one for me. You're responsible for your life.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of I've seen in therapy like someone will particularly when I was working with a Medicaid population in grad school, people would like secure housing, let's say, like they were, their housing wasn't stable for whatever reason, and they would enter into a more stable situation. And then some of their symptoms would get worse. And I was just like, I thought that was so interesting because I was just like, oh, like, but why? And for me, I think it was like, and obviously every case is different, and some of them, of course, did improve. But for some of them, I think it was like a Maslow's thing. It was like, okay, well, now you have your basic security and stuff met. Now I'm more preoccupied with like my emotions, my sense of safety, my sense of belonging, et cetera, et cetera. And so sometimes it was, I mean, like you said, people are so complicated. Like you really can't even
People
believe
are
it.
so complicated. And I think that we discount transitions. I really do. Because even when you use the example that you just gave, like that's a transition to have
Yeah,
stability, right? Like you go, and most
right,
people will say dysfunction, and you're used to dysfunction, you're used to chaos. No, I'm just not
right.
used to this. It has nothing to do with like no longer being in dysfunction. I just don't know this
Mm,
world. No different from a
mm,
child being exposed to something. So I think that we discount micro and macro transitions. Like
right.
they really have the ability to plague your mental health. And you just, when you said Maslow's, I've thought about that model. I understand it. I don't know how much I
Hmm.
agree with it in the sense that I think if we're talking about like housing, food, those type of things, but safety safety and those things are an illusion. You take the LA fires, right? Like you
Right.
wake up one day and you have all of those things. Are you familiar with Bruce Lipton, like the biology of beliefs?
I don't think so. Tell me.
Okay, I don't know if I have it down here, but he does a lot of research on people that are diagnosed with like cancer, for example. And the people that really believe that they will survive cancer, they do. The people that don't, you slowly start to watch them declining. And I think that how you think about and approach life is so important. Like whether you
Mm,
have something, whether you don't have something, like how you deal with again what you have right in front of you matters. Like how you deal with the present moment matters. Yesterday does not matter. Tomorrow is not here yet. Like let's focus here.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we're nearing our end of our time together. So I want to throw out one more myth, and then we'll wrap up, and we'll have to
Okay.
continue at another time. Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, let's see. What would be a good one to get your Oh, this one's interesting. Myth number 6, hurt people hurt people. How do you understand this one?
I did a post. So, hurt people don't hurt people that ain't hurting. That's what I say.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, I think that if you still subscribe to hurt people, you are, depending on the context, you're responding to some form of pain there. But I don't know that that applies like across the board because if I'm not hurting, if you're trying to hurt me, Joe, and you're hurting, if I'm not hurting based off of whatever you're trying to project or put out, it doesn't bother me because it's like I didn't even see what you were trying to do because I've grown, I've evolved in some way, or I've forgiven you, whatever it may be, or there's no
Yeah.
judgment in terms of how you're showing up
Hmm.
because there's a sense of acceptance.
Yeah, totally. I think for this one, I categorize it as a myth. I'm actually very envious of your articulation. Hurt people if you're hurting. I wish I could put it in the book, but it's already written. So I really like that a lot because I think that that's well, that speaks to because well, what I talk about is like well, people also lash out if they're just generally like dysregulated,
Hmm.
you know, and so which and maybe that comes from a hurt, maybe it comes from something else.
Human,
I don't
just being
know.
human sometimes.
Totally. Totally. I mean, I think for me, the reason why I classify it as a myth is I think, well, a lot of people have been hurt. And it's funny because I feel like the same people that are saying hurt people are also the people saying like everybody has trauma,
Yep,
right? Where it's
yep.
kind of like, it's like, okay, well, if we're all hurt, and I do think that everybody gets hurt in life,
Eh,
like whether it's classified as trauma or something
hmm.
else, but not everyone becomes an abuser,
Yeah, I would
you know?
agree. I would agree.
And I wouldn't even say that, everyone, I don't even think it's accurate to say that everybody hurts others, even inadvertently. I mean, my experience working with survivors of trauma and abuse is they usually swing in the other direction,
Mm.
has been my observation, you know, whether it's like the people pleasing, which is a word that we didn't necessarily get into. I know that's a whole can of
Oh
worms, but
gosh.
often people that have been through a lot like that are so cautious and vigilant about the slightest possibility of offense, and which is really, I mean, amazing. I mean, I've treated some people who, I mean, you can't even just imagine what they go through, right? And then you kind of size them up in terms of personality, and it's like you are an unbelievably like gentle human being,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so it just doesn't resonate, this idea that hurt people hurt people. I think that people like to say it because when it's true, it makes it easier to understand, to forgive, to let go. And for that, I don't want to, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think it of course applies sometimes,
I would
right?
agree.
But I've also seen a lot of people use it as a way to rationalize staying in relationships, friendships, or situations that are just no good for them,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. This is an
Well,
incredible book. This is going to be a really good book. Like, I'm
thank
definitely
you.
going to promote it because we we speak the same language. It just doesn't sound the same. And
Yeah.
I think that messaging needs to get out there
Yeah.
because I only think that life is just going to continue to get more complex, more
Mm,
nuances, and if people are able to understand and remove the emotional connections that they have to this new mental health jargon, your book could do a world of service to people that are really
mm,
looking to self actualize, whether they have a good hand, whether they have a bad hand, and people can
mm.
decide what that is.
I really, really appreciate that. I'm certainly going to get you a copy, and we'll have to have you back on when it comes out. For those of you who are still listening, the book Psychobabble, Viral Mental Health Myths and the Truths to Set You Free is going to be sold wherever you get your books on September 23rd, 2025. As we wrap up here, RaQuel, how can people find you? How can they keep up with you? This has been a phenomenal conversation, and I want to make sure that you, me, and anyone else who kind of aligns, I guess is the word, philosophically, can keep track of each other and really get to know each other. Because I think that one of the cool things about having to write this book is and have this conversation with you is that this is only a problem because mental health is so in the zeitgeist like it is. And there are a lot of great things about that. So in some ways, it's a really good problem to have, but I think it's our responsibility. I would imagine you agree that it's our responsibility as practitioners to let people know that there are competing perspectives, just like there are in medicine and in law and
Yep.
in whatever the subject might be.
Yep. No. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. And once you had asked me to be on the podcast, I went and looked at your videos and I was like, I like Joe. But you can find me. I am on Instagram and I am on TikTok. My name is pretty long. It's like Raquel underscore the underscore capacity. But if you put Raquel and capacity, you'll be able to find me.
All right, right on. And for those of you who are still watching or listening, please like or subscribe, whatever platform you're on. I'd really, really appreciate it.